Welcome to Masters of Scale.
Thanks for having me.
It's 2024. I want you to take us back to 2009, Warped Tour, Denver. Why were you there? What did you see?
At the time, I was in my first real advertising job at this agency in Boulder called Crispin, Porter, and Bogusky. A couple buddies from high school, they were roadies for this band called Medina Lake that was on the Warped Tour, and they hit me up. Hey, Mike, we're going to be in Denver. You should come to the show. We'll get you passes, all of that. So I went to the show, hung out. The way they have the backstage of Warped Tour, since it's outside, is all these tour buses are all parked in this one like sealed off area, and the bands are all hanging out on each other's tour buses, sitting in lawn chairs outside. So we were just hanging out, and these guys, they were drinking what like Monster Energy cans. And I remember asking them, I'm like, are you guys just ripping energy drinks out here in the hot sun? They're like, no, it's water. I'm like, what do you mean? And they're like, on the can, it says tour water on the bottom.
But in what looks like an energy...
It's a Monster can, yeah. And then basically what I find out later is, as the official sponsor, there's something along the lines of they don't want anybody else drinking something that's not their beverage on stage.
Right.
So they were never going to force bands to drink energy drinks that they didn't want to drink. So they had to manufacture this special product for the bands that was water, but it looked like their product on stage.
Right, because these guys, if they're pounding energy drinks out in the sun, their hearts are going to explode. They're bouncing all around, but the brand's got to show up for the audience, and right?
Yeah, and not everybody likes the taste of these things, so it was just like, hey, you got to provide something else for them. So that was kind of the thing was, okay, these guys are on stage drinking what looks like Monster to all these kids in the crowd, but it was really just water. And I remember thinking that was, one, it was interesting. I mean, two, I thought it was a little fucked up.
Because like the trickery.
It's the trickery.
Yeah.
It was trickery, right? 10 years later, creating Liquid Death, more because I saw that there was white space in terms of healthy products are really never marketed in a funny, cool way. It's always unhealthy stuff that's really funny, like beer and candy and junk food and all of that.
All right. Well, before we get to the 10 years later of it, take us back a little bit further. Where did your career start? How did you get started in the work world?
8th grade, I started playing guitar, and we were in a punk band that we and some friends had, and we did that all through high school.
Where'd you grow up?
Outside Philadelphia, maybe like 30 minutes outside Philadelphia, in like the cornfields of Pennsylvania. I went to high school there. But yeah, that was what I did in high school. Like, we had a band, like that's all we did was we played music after school. We played shows, we listened to music. Like, that was our thing. But I was always, since a kid, I was always good at drawing, like since like age 6. So I was always sort of on the creative side. So in the band, I was the guy that was designing the t-shirts and silk screening them, going to Kinko's with glue and cutting out stuff to make show flyers and like the photocopy days long before Photoshop and any of that. So I was always in the creative design world. And the guy who was a drummer in our band, his dad was a award-winning like Philadelphia graphic designer named Dave Bell. And I would see in his house all this cool design work he was doing for clients. And that was where I was probably 16, 17 when I realized that graphic design was a real job. And I was like, everyone's like, oh, what do you want to do? What are you going to go to college for? I never knew. I was just kind of like a punk kid. But then I was like, I could get paid to do this. Like, I like doing this. So then ultimately I decided to go to college for graphic design.
And then you went into a company after college to do graphic design work?
So I started college in graphic design, but then after a couple semesters, I switched over to the advertising program. Because when I was always growing up, I was into laughing and humor. Like, I loved Mad Magazine. So a lot of my creative was about making funny things more than like perfect grid designed, like Bauhaus German.
Right. It was more of a punk sensibility, the Alfred E. Newman of it all. Yeah,
totally. So then when I saw all the advertising kids making these funny ads and things in school, I was like, oh, that's way more interesting to me. So then I switched over to the ad side, graduated in advertising. And then, my first, ad job out of school was for this agency in Boulder called Crispin. But
But you know, it's what's interesting about this is you have these both punk roots and entrepreneurial roots, right? I mean, you're silk screening, you're figuring it out, you're making the merch. There's a real entrepreneurial quality to this, and a countercultural quality to
yeah,
it, right? And so, you know, even the most progressive of creative ad agencies are still corporate
right.
entities. So what was it like for you moving into that world? I know you're not showing up in a suit and tie every day,
No.
but still, like, was it, did you like that? Did you hate it? How did you how did that resonate with you?
Yeah, I mean, well, one, there's all different kinds of agencies, right? And Crispin Porter was the one that I thought felt the most punk rock in spirit. Like they did really disruptive stuff. And a buddy of mine interned for them when they were still had an office in Miami. And he kind of showed me the agency. They had a book that had just come out, and I looked at all the stuff they were doing, and it was like, that's what I want to do. Like I don't want to make run of the mill TV commercials that no one cares about. Like these are really cool, funny, ridiculous things. So they were a great agency for that. So yes, from a corporate standpoint, agencies aren't super corporate, right? Like people are walking around tattoos, t-shirts, like flip-flops. Like it's very, I mean, the creative culture
Yeah.
they want to keep there. But the clients are incredibly corporate, right? Like Volkswagen, Domino's Pizza, Burger King. I mean, these were giant clients they had that were very corporate. And I think that was what I realized in my advertising career. Like I kind of could fit in with the creative weirdos a bit, but it was still, wanting to do really great creative work that these corporate clients just did not want to buy.
Right.
Right.
Right. They want Don Draper coming in and hitting them with something that's on the nose for them, that gets them, that has maybe is one notch off, where you're creating stuff that is really transgressive.
Well, I feel like in big corporations, everybody's just trying to keep their jobs.
Yeah.
So it's like no one wants to take any risk. It's like, hey, we're going to put it in a focus group and it tested well. And it could be like 60% of the time what tests well fails in the market, but at least their job's covered because, hey, we tested it.
Right.
Like I remember, working on DiGiorno frozen pizzas. And it's like what they think is the most critical part of their advertising is what they call the cheese pull shot, where it's like the shot of the slice being lifted up with the cheese, and they'll spend $500,000 just to get that shot. And it's like, really, do you think as a frozen pizza company in a world where there's a pizza shop on every corner that your problem is, oh, if we make it look really good, it'll change people's minds about frozen pizza? No. But if you think about the context of clinical focus groups and things like that, of course, what makes you hungrier? This or this? That? Oh, see, that's what we should do. But it's like, that might not actually be the business problem that you need to solve. Right?
And were you pushing against this? Were you saying to them, like, guys, who gives a fuck about the cheese pull shot? Like, there are any number of frozen pizzas. You walk into a supermarket, you can find, like, what's the difference? Like, the difference is how you differentiate on brand, unless you've got some exceptional product innovation. Or were you pushing the envelope with them, or was it like these guys aren't even going to listen to what I'm saying?
Well, DiGiorno is owned by Nestle, so giant corporation. They're not going to listen to the small agency creative director too much. It's like they've got it's too much of a system. But I would push wherever I could just to make something interesting, because I mean that's ultimately how we look at marketing, even at Liquid Death, and how I would try to sell this to folks is, look, I want to turn your whatever it is $1 million marketing investment into $20 million in awareness. I want to give you the most insane ROI and make you look like a genius to your bosses. That's what I want to do. But still, you don't get that kind of ROI without doing something that almost doesn't feel like marketing, because nobody wants to share run of the mill marketing. No one wants to talk about it. Most people skip it. You have to truly kind of entertain people and make something they've never seen before to be like, oh my God, did you see this? It's so great. You have to see it. And then you have people generating free media for you
Yeah.
just because the idea is interesting.
Right. I mean, we're inundated with content, with marketing messages. I mean, a lifetime ago when I was at MySpace, I mean, not that anyone even remembers MySpace anymore, but we coined the term the momentum effect, and it was really what is shareable, right? I mean, if it's not just got to stop your thumb, it's got to be something that stops your thumb that you want to click on, but then you want to send to your best friend, send to your partner, send to your whatever it is. Make you got to fucking see this thing. Like, this is awesome, right? And so, and I get that inherent conservatism, that like, I just don't want to lose my job, like cover my ass, whatever. But there's also a desire to do great things, right? So how are you resolving that tension as you're sitting there in an agency going like, I know these ideas, like some of these ideas may be really bad, but at least we're pushing the envelope, but there are great ideas in here. And I just can't get these folks, these big companies to bite. Like, how are you dealing with that tension?
It was tough. Like I went through, when I started at Crispin, which did really outlandish, cool work, but it kind of had a reputation of like a sweatshop. I mean, I remember there was a period I worked for 60 straight days without taking one day off.
Wow.
Like 7-day weeks, 100-hour weeks sometimes. Like it was
loving it, or
I was young. I was making real stuff for the first time. So yeah, in the beginning, like it was fun, and like you're burning the midnight oil at 3 a.m. with people trying to come up with the next big whatever. But I think after almost 2 years of that, I was getting kind of burnt out. I went and took a job in Seattle for an agency that was not doing good stuff. And, being young, they sell you on, oh, hey, we want to rebuild the creative department. That's why we're hiring people from Crispin, because we want the great creatives in there. And as a young person, I'm thinking, oh, the only reason they don't have great ideas is because they just don't have great people. Yeah. So I'm going to come in there and come up with all this. But it's like, no, you're going into the system, and the people at the top, they control everything. It doesn't matter if they bring in cool people down below. And I kind of found myself, making a lot more money, but just doing the worst creative stuff like I could possibly imagine.
Do you feel like you were like dying inside a little bit?
Kind of, yeah. And I was so young in my career. I was only a couple of years in, and then I was only at that place for 6 months before I realized I could be trapped here.
Yeah.
Like, I might not ever be able to get out, because in advertising, the only way you get jobs is what's in your portfolio.
Yep.
What's the last big talked about thing that you've done in terms of a commercial or a campaign.
And you can't show the stuff that didn't sell.
Right. Yeah. They don't want to see that.
Right.
Like, I mean, they have some tolerance for that when you're early in your career, but they're like, no, we want to see produced work.
Yeah.
Which I think is a flaw in the way they evaluated creativity. It doesn't mean someone doesn't have a lot of talent if the client just doesn't want good stuff. Right?
Yeah.
So then I ended up in San Francisco at a place that was more of like a design ad agency hybrid. Again, not doing really interesting stuff at all. Now I'm like maybe 3 or 4 years into my career, making good money, but not making good stuff. And then I'm still on the side trying to apply to get back into good agencies. Like I kind of realized, hey, I made the mistake. I sort of chased money. And then now I realize like, no, I want to go, I'm down to make less, but go do really great stuff, because then long-term I'll be in a better spot. But like I was sending out portfolios to all the agencies I wanted to work at, like Goodby, and trying to get back to Crispin, and just no one would hire me. And I really felt like I was at this place where I've squandered my career.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I'm just stuck here, making okay money, but not something you're going to like have a family on in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Right.
So what do you do? What do you do in that moment?
So then I started thinking rationally, okay, well, if clients are my barrier, I know that I have the ability to make great work, but the clients that I have in these particular work scenarios are controlling what gets made or not made. I said, I need to make my own product. Then I can control the marketing for it. If we can sell the product, that generates revenue that we can hire people, make marketing with. But it was sort of that desperation. I need to create my own product that I can make the kind of marketing for that I think brands should be doing.
Okay, but you've been working in these creative agencies. You've got an entrepreneurial spirit, clearly, but we're still in the 2000s. This isn't the 2020s where like supply chain issues are solved for by and large.
Oh, no, yeah. This is like 2010.
So what do you do?
So at that time, one of the clients I was working on at work was Virgin America Airlines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which was doing pretty good creative.
Pretty great creative, yeah. And for me, still, it was still, their creative was we do a billboard that's like a cool photo and a funny headline. Like that was the extent of creative, but it was decent. But I got really into Richard Branson. I read one of his books, and I loved the Virgin model, which was go into a really stale category, be the one cool brand, and then it almost just changes the category in some sense. So like, any airline that has a TV in the seat, that's because of Virgin. Nobody had that. Virgin was the first, just everybody on the plane had TVs in the seats, and now every single airline has TVs, right? So I love that model that, hey, you can go in, disrupt, and not have to spend a ton of money to generate attention, interest, market share.
In the case of Virgin, that was an actual product enhancement. That was a customer experience enhancement. But I'll never forget, I was meeting with the founder and CEO of Stance, Socks, but now Beyond. And what he was saying was he would go walk through Target or CVS and look at a product category where just all the products look the same.
Yeah.
Right. And that's like, I want to attack that because that's the opportunity where I don't have to differentiate on product. I can differentiate on brand and marketing. Yeah. So was that part of the unlock for you as well?
Yeah. And I think, that was the idea in terms of, okay, if I'm going to create my own product, what's a sea of sameness, or what's like a stale category where there's just nothing exciting happening in it? If you're going to be an entrepreneur, because that was, 2010 San Francisco, still startup culture, a lot of startup stuff happening, that there was a lot of things around, hey, if you're going to build your own business, you kind of need to make it around something that you know better than most people. Like you need some little competitive advantage that, hey, you care more about this thing, you look into it more. So I started with those two things. Okay, stale category. What's something that I probably know more about than the average person or love more? And that was at the time, like alcohol spirits. Like I was really into all different kinds of bourbons and mezcals and amaros. And one of my best friends, she worked for a huge wine distributor and spirits distributor. And at the time I was dating a girl who was like, worked at a cocktail bar doing like mixology stuff. So I just felt like I was in that world really well. So I said, okay, let's do an alcohol brand. I was also a huge fan of, there was a guy who was an ad agency guy from Philadelphia named Steve Grass. And he had an agency, and they created the spirits brand, Sailor Jerry Rum and Hendrick's Gin.
Okay.
So two massively successful things as created by sort of a creative guy that won with brand in these categories. So I had that. So it all kind of laddered up. Yeah, alcohol. So then I found the only alcohol category I could find where there was not a single cool brand was brandy.
Okay.
There was literally dust on the bottles on the shelves. It was a thing. And then I tasted it and I'm like, wow, this is actually a lot like bourbon. Bourbon was the fastest growing thing at the time. So clearly this is a brand problem, not a taste problem.
Yep.
I can solve a brand problem. Cold called some of the Hendrick's Gin people from LinkedIn, told them about my idea for this brandy. They liked it, found a distillery up in Northern California.
And you weren't worried they were going to like take the idea and do something with it?
Not really. Not really. Yeah. I mean, I already had the idea figured out. I used to say in the ad agency business, like we're in the business of PDFs. All we do is create presentations. Like X% actually gets made. You're just giving pitches and pitches and pitches.
Yeah.
So I was good at PDFs.
And a skill turns out to be useful, but maybe a little dubious.
Yeah.
So when you were looking at brandy as the category and you're seeing these stale, literally dust-covered brands, did you have a spark of inspiration? Like, did you know what the brand was?
Kind of, yeah. I was like, hey, from a taste profile perspective, like going to rational thinking, this is most similar to bourbon.
Right.
Aged a very similar way. The only difference is one starts with grapes, one starts with corn. So there's a little bit more sweetness, but it's not sweet, right? So I said, okay, let's brand this in a way that the masses can connect with what it actually tastes like better. Because most people perceive brandy to be like sweet liqueur.
Yeah.
But it's not that. So all these people that love bourbon and wanted to find, I'm like, let's just make it look like a bourbon. Like, let's make it Americana, make it feel like bourbon, but it's like American brandy. And like take it out of that like shadow of French luxury of cognac, which is the main thing people knew about brandy. They're like, oh, I've heard of Hennessy. That's a type of brandy,
right?
But a very specific type, just like Merlot is a specific type of wine and very different than Champagne, another type of wine. So yeah, I was like, okay, we're going to make it feel like bourbon. and then, came up with a name that, coming from my background, which was growing up punk rock, there's a band called Hot Water Music from Florida, and one of their songs was called Western Grace. So I said, yeah, let's just name it Western Grace. So there was like a nuanced tie to the world of punk rock.
Yeah.
But still this very Americana feeling.
Yeah, it's hard to pull off an Americana brand with a nod to punk, but you like thread the needle with Western Grace.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That was my first real entrepreneurial kind of get thrown into the fire.
So, I mean, you raise money, like what'd you do?
So the two people I started it with, they were based in Philadelphia. So they said, hey, if we're going to do this, you need to move back to Philadelphia. You can't be in San Francisco. So in a way, I begrudgingly left the West Coast to go back to Philly, took a whatever day job for an agency that, was not doing cool stuff by my standards. Just to
pays the bills.
Pays the bills.
Yeah.
And then I was building that sort of on the side. And, we were able to start so small with that. We didn't have to raise much money. And the two people I started with, like they had enough of, success that they had some money sitting around. They could invest a little bit. I had nothing. I had student loans. Like I had nothing in my bank account. I convinced my parents to loan me $5,000 so that I could just put something in. And I was like, hey, I'll pay you back in a certain period of time. So that was enough for us to just produce like maybe 60 cases.
But I mean, just pause you back. Like, how do you even know, like, who's going to make it for you? Like, how do you, like.
So we found a distillery in Northern California.
Okay.
So when I came up with the idea for the brand, I gave them the name, bottle design, whole marketing, brand strategy, PDF.
Yep.
And then I went and presented that to this distillery because I found there's like one distillery that makes brandy at the time. They were up in Ukiah.
And thank God for the internet because that's.
Yeah, we never found out about that. Yeah. Right. And they've been making some of the best brandy in the world. Like they were written up in the Robb Report and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I went up there.
The Robb Report, for those who don't know, is basically like the guide to life for really rich people.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I went up there, got a meeting with them, presented them this deck. And, I think they were kind of excited. Like, oh, we've been waiting for people to care about brandy, especially like young people and make it interesting and cool. So I think they were into this notion of what I was doing. And they're like, yeah, we've got barrels and barrels of brandy sitting around. Like we'll sell you the brandy and bottle it for you.
Great. So they're not doing a special mix for you. The special blend.
They did. Like they've got all these, and they said, hey, let us put together a blend.
Gotcha.
That can get to the price point you want it to be at.
Gotcha.
So it's like, hey, this much of the good stuff, this much of the medium, and then this much of like the cheaper stuff. Mix it all together. And yeah, we did like a custom blend. That we all thought tasted like, because we were like, hey, we want it to be as bourbon-like as possible.
But not reinventing the wheel. They're taking what exists. They're creating a custom blend for you that hits the palate, the note that you want to hit. And really it's about the branding at that point. Yeah. So why are we not here talking about Western Grace? Why are we here having Liquid Death conversation instead? What happens with Western Grace?
Early on, no idea how to start a company. I hadn't, alcohol, no experience in alcohol. Alcohol just being so regulated. Just what you can do and not do was prohibitive.
Where did that hold you back?
So from a brand perspective, right? My contribution is, hey, or at least what I was thinking was, hey, we can make really cool marketing brand, push this out there. But the reality was, hey, we're not going to have any money to do that for a long time. And there's all these restrictions against what you can run on social media for alcohol because it's age restricted and how you can do that. And, probably the bigger part was I sort of got business married to the wrong two people early. Because it was like, hey, you guys were a part of these big, huge success stories. And how many times do you realize that like all the people that work on stuff, there's maybe one evil genius that's doing kind of everything and everybody else sort of takes the credit. Then you put them on their own. And it's like, because I remember the first presentation they gave to me, I was like, oh no, like
it didn't hit.
This is nowhere near the level of what these other brands I thought, they had such a hand in, were a part of. And then, because they both came from the same place, same thinking, it was always 2 versus 1.
So not only you're outvoted, but basically they have one bag to reach into with one set of answers. It's not dynamic problem solving. Oh shit, this is different this way. We need to rethink this.
Yeah. And then, anything I wanted to do that would just get shot down. And then also the other tricky part was they, because they had their own sources of income, whether it was they were homeowners and they maybe could rent property, or they were doing consulting work for alcohol companies on the side. Like they said, hey, we can be full-time on this and not have or we can have another full-time job. So they're like, hey, if you want to maintain equal share in the company as us, you have to work on it 40 hours a week with no pay. And I'm like, well, I can't do that.
Right.
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 So by the time we kind of got to that, I'm just like, you know what? I'll take my little vested piece that I have. You guys go grow it from here. I'm going to go back to my ad world and I'm going to figure out what my next thing is.
And was that disheartening? Was it inspiring? Was it like, okay, I've learned it. Now I can go do this the right way? Or was it like, I got to take a big step back. I go back to, a somewhat at least unfulfilling day job and figure out if there's another path. Like, how did you react to that?
Yeah. I mean, it was the lowest point for me that I could, in life, I think, really, which was, I left San Francisco. I moved back I'm back in my hometown. I'm working for an agency that is just nowhere near the level I'd want to be at. This thing that was my passion has just kind of turned to shit. And then literally the crappy agency I worked at fired me because I think they just saw that like I wasn't in it and didn't care. So it was like, I'm sitting here, no job, Philadelphia, my little startup thing that I was so excited about, that's going away. And then I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. And it was funny. The first thing I thought of was, look, I got this entrepreneurial experience. I know I'm an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
I love this more than any other thing I've ever done. I think I can be good at this because I have the marketing side, but I think I have a little bit of the business side as well. So then I said, all right, I'm going to go get an MBA. Let me go learn. I have the creative side. Maybe if I can go learn the business side, I'll be this unique kind of skill set of like brand creative and also business.
Right.
And then I can maybe be better equipped to go start the next thing successfully. So I talked to a bunch of friends who were successful business guys, and they were all like, hey, look, if you're going to do this, only do it if you're going to one of the top schools.
Yeah.
Like spend the money. It's got to be like Harvard or Northwestern or one of these places. Like it's the only way it's worth it. Just because of the connections you'll make, everything else. So I just like had this notion like, all right, I'm going to try to apply to Harvard and get into the MBA program. And the last math class I took as a design kid was Algebra 2.
Uh-huh.
But I was always good at math. Math was my strong suit as a creative, which was random, right? Math made sense to me. So then I was studying for the GMATs, relearning all of that.
And how old are you at this point?
Probably 29.
Okay.
Living in
so
Philadelphia.
on the older end.
On the older end.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just constant studying. And like once I get focused on something, like I can be laser focused.
Yeah.
So I just went crazy on that. And then, I was even talking to this guy who was in the program there, who was a designer that got accepted. And he's kind of giving me the, hey, this is how to think about it. And then, I go and I did some practice GMATs and did okay on them, like enough where it's like, hey, with your background plus this, you could still get in. And then when I went and took the actual one, I totally bombed it.
Do you think that was your subconscious driving it and being like, this is not what I'm meant to do? Or was it just not your day?
I think it was just, I wanted it so bad because I felt like it's my last beacon to get out of this thing.
Yeah.
That I studied so hard. I wanted it to happen really bad. And I think like I didn't sleep the night before. I drank a bunch of coffee. So I was like, kind of on edge. And I was just so nervous. I think that was part of it. Like I think, and then at that point I was probably thinking about, okay, we have to wait a certain amount of time before you can take it again. And it was like starting from square one felt not good. Like, man, I got to go back to this. And I was on a little bit of a timeline here. Like I don't have a year to figure this out. Like I need to move quickly.
Right. Or I'm taking a job at another.
Or I'm taking a job at another crappy agency.
Just checking boxes here.
Right.
Yeah.
So then it happened to be that I saw a guy I worked with in Boulder was starting his own startup agency in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Okay.
Called Humanot. And they were looking for a creative director. And they had this idea of wanting to not just be an ad agency, but also help create brands, which I thought was really interesting. I was like, oh, that's me, right?
Yeah.
So then I applied and I showed them, hey, look, created this liquor company, but I've also done this. And yeah, they hired me. So then that kind of came out of nowhere. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to go do this.
Okay. And so just before we get to Chattanooga, I just want to spend a minute because that moment of, or that stretch of being despondent, of being like, I tried this thing, I was so passionate, I know the creative was good, it just didn't work, and now like I'm fired from a job that I didn't even like, I didn't care about, I don't even respect these people, and they fired me.
Yeah.
How did you deal with the depth of that? Because that's a I think it's a moment a lot of people experience, and it's really hard, and people can go in holes that it's hard to get out of.
Yeah.
So how did you manage that?
It didn't help probably like at the time, like my roommate was a bartender in the service industry and our apartment was just a constant party. You know, like I was like partying and like I was trying to forget as much as I could.
You were numbing.
Numbing, yeah. But then once I got this job in Chattanooga, then it kind of woke me out of it. Okay, now I have another opportunity.
Swept the clouds out of the way, sun shining again.
Yeah, and I just went, again, full focus again on that. And then that was when we started doing like some of the best creative work that I had done in my career yet. Because we were small, it was kind of based around a more disruptive agency that was more what framed my thinking of creative.
Yeah.
So we were just more on the same page. And we started doing some of the first funny marketing for the organic industry. Because at the time, we were connected to, it was called Only Organic, which was a group of like some of the big organic company CMOs who were responsible for creating like the actual organic seal that denotes if something's organic, right?
That gets people to pay 20-30% more at Whole Foods or whatever because they see that on there.
Yeah. And before I got there, they had just launched this really funny YouTube commercial called The Natural Effect, where it was calling out that the word natural on packaging literally means nothing.
Yeah.
And it was like, it was truthful, but they did it in this really funny way where it was this concept that was called the false advertising industry agency. And this guy talks about like everything from dick pills to this, like we're responsible for it. And then our best thing is the natural effect. It's like, hey, just put a bar on it. It's natural. So I thought that, that was one of the reasons I really wanted to work there. And then that was so successful that we did more stuff for them. That then led to a big company called Organic Valley.
Sure.
Big Whole Foods kind of, I think $1 billion company. They created the first organic protein shake. Now they had an agency, I think in like Minneapolis, that did most of their marketing, which was just like pretty sunsets and family farms that they were selling to like Whole Foods moms, right? They knew that this was a different crowd. If we're going to win with a protein shake, we're kind of talking to like the gym crowd, probably a bit more male.
Yeah.
So they gave us a shot as a small 9-person agency as like a one-off project. Hey, can you come up with something to launch this thing? We don't have a lot of money. And yeah, we want you to do one of your like YouTube videos that, So we pitched this idea to them called Save the Bros, which was like, hey, if people keep drinking these chemical protein, or bros keep drinking these chemical protein shakes, they're not going to be around much longer. And who's going to bring the beer pong table? And it's like this funny PSA that it's like, to keep bros around, get them on.
Right. There's no more cornhole if we don't save the bros.
Right. Yeah. You got to get them on an organic protein shake. So I think we shot that video for like 60 grand. We put it on YouTube. And originally Organic Valley was super nervous. Like they liked the idea at first, but then when they saw the final thing, they made the mistake of showing it to some of their family farmers. They're like, oh, we don't get this. So they were like, guys, I don't think we can run this. Our farmers don't get it. But sure enough, we were able to convince them like, look, you spent no money on this. Like you guys are, used to spending insane amounts of money, 60 grand. Like you probably lose that in couch cushions.
You're spending $1 million on a 30-second ad.
There's nothing. And I'm like, look, and if for some reason it doesn't go well, like we can just take it down and no one will know, right? So we were able to convince them to run it. We run it, goes completely viral, millions of views, every press outlet, media outlets talking about it. Then they were excited. Then they're like, hey, how do we get more bros? We can't get bros at trade shows and everything else. Like they loved it after that. It was about the moment when I started having my next sort of aha moment for what my next brand was going to be. Because I was always thinking about, hey, I'm an entrepreneur, almost wanted to do an MBA that didn't really work out, probably for the better. It would have been a lot of money I didn't need to spend. now I'm at this agency that I went to because they were kind of in the idea of like ad people creating brands can be powerful.
Right. And so you didn't think, well, we'll just create a bunch of brands here and I'll just do this here. You were starting to think, I'm ready for my next act.
Yeah, I was always kind of had that in the, like waiting for the inspiration of what the next thing was going to be. And that's when it was like, there's a big gap in the health food world of doing funny, interesting brands.
Yeah.
And then that's when I, started thinking of water and all that.
So when did the penny drop for on water? Like, was there a moment where you were like, this is the thing?
Well, when I started with the thought process of, okay, I want to make a healthy beverage. Also coming from the baggage of alcohol is the most regulated thing ever. I'm like, what has no regulation?
Right.
No ingredients, no complicated supply. I mean, what I thought was not complicated supply chain,
right? But
it felt very simple. So it was like, that was like the way I got to water first. Okay, water is literally the simplest thing and the most healthy thing.
Right. It can't get simpler than this.
Yeah, you can market water to a 4-year-old or a 60.
It may be expensive to ship. There might be quality control issues, but it's water.
It's water, right? And then I just start doing, I go in my like deep dive focus mode where I'm like Googling and doing research on the industry and everything. And all of a sudden I see, holy crap, bottled water just surpassed carbonated soft drinks as the number one packaged beverage category in the US. It was like 20 billion at the time. So it's like, wow, huge category. And then it was like we talked about, sea of sameness.
Yeah.
Oh my God, every single brand looks exactly the same. It's all in plastic bottles. Nothing's interesting.
And similar to the Organic Valley story, largely packaged and marketed with more of a sort of either broad mainstream or even female bent to it.
Yeah. Very female focused, very, fitnessy, like
yoga.
Aspirational, good looking people, it was very one thing.
Yeah.
But everybody drinks water, and I think that was something that I pulled from my days of being in, punk rock and metal bands was long before the Whole Foods world. All the vegans were in the punk and metal world. Like that was a huge movement in punk. It was like animal rights and that kind of a thing. So, I mean, I was a vegetarian for most of high school, had a lot of friends that were like that. And this was way before Whole Foods. And now it's become such a mainstream thing. Whereas like veganism and that kind of thing was almost seen as extreme when in those days. So I knew that there was a sentiment of health and positivity in this like rebellious world that I came from. And there was nobody making brands for those people. It was just kind of the more rational, low-hanging fruit kind of approach. So I always did care about health. Like I didn't drink soda, even at that time, didn't drink energy drinks really. So it was like, oh, I care about health. How do we now take this? How do I take a healthy thing and almost make it just as fun as all the other stuff that's not healthy?
Right.
And then that's where we started kind of building the brand.
So take us through the kind of two directions from there. One is the brand, right? I mean, okay, the insight that all this kind of looks the same, sea of sameness and, massive market, et cetera. But like, how do we get to what that brand is, what that brand identity, what the name is? But then also like, how do we actually source it? How do we package it? How do we get to market? Do we need investment capital? So let's start with brand, but then I'd love to hear the logistics of how you figured this out.
Well, what's funny is I started with the logistics before the brand.
Okay, great. Let's start there.
Yeah, because I was kind of like, before I spent too much time on getting attached to a brand and fun thing, like let's make sure the business side of this is doable.
Can I even pull this off?
Yeah, because I just went through the craziness of trying to produce a barrel-aged spirit.
Right.
And I knew that was so much of the hurdle, not the brand. So I really went deep in looking for how to can water, because I knew I wanted it to be in a can. That I did know because...
For sustainability reasons or for brand reasons?
It started originally as, hey, all cool, fun things come in cans.
Okay.
There's nothing healthy, few healthy things come in a tall boy can.
Yeah.
So I was like, hey, I want this to feel like something fun that you're not supposed to have, but what's inside it is water.
Yep.
So I knew I wanted to be in a can. And then the more I started researching cans, that's when I started reading the infinite recyclability thing. The articles were coming up around plastic at that time. This is like, 2014, call it. So like, oh wow, there's people talking about how bad plastic is, companies getting rid of plastic. Oh, cans are infinitely recyclable. Now it's like, okay, cans make sense for a lot of reasons. So I knew I wanted to be in a can, but that's about it. I wanted to do a tall boy can of water. And I just started Googling potential co-packers, all of that. And what I didn't realize, I did it over a period of time. So this was maybe 2014, wasn't finding anything. And then 2015, I had taken another job back in Los Angeles. Still on the side, I was still kind of had this little Liquid Death, but it wasn't called Liquid Death. It was just this can water side project that I wasn't spending crazy amounts of time on, where I'm fully focused. It was just, hey, I made good creative. I'm back in my career again. Had another good job in California. I'm kind of just enjoying having a career again. But hey, I got this little thing that's kind of percolating on the side. And I would just keep, when I had time, looking into more and more, can you actually produce this? And turns out there are no co-packers in North America who can put spring water in cans.
Zero.
How's
it possible?
That's what I thought. Well, the thing is, if you're doing bottled water or canned water, you basically have to bottle at the source.
Okay.
Because it's way too expensive to tanker truck water from a source halfway across the country to a bottler.
And then then they get it on an 18-wheeler.
It was just too cost prohibitive.
Yeah.
So all bottled water, they have a source, it gets pumped into the facility from whatever spring it is. And then because canned water was not a category, all the sources that had bottling capabilities only had plastic bottles.
Really?
So canning lines are like, $20, $30, $50 million to install at scale. So nobody had canning at water sources.
And just help me understand, because beer is mostly water, right? And beer comes in cans. So there was no one who was doing beer who could just do the water. It just didn't exist.
So there were a couple beer companies that were able to can water, and they would do it for disaster relief, like Budweiser, whoever. They would do their canned water that they say, oh, we're donating 100,000 cans, which really cost them $30,000 as a $50 billion company, literally the least they could do.
Yeah.
They have so many different bottlers around that a lot of their bottlers might be using just the purified tap water that goes into the facility to make the beer with, not actual quality spring water. And I did know that from a brand standpoint and a product standpoint, if we were going to make canned water, it was going to have to be charged a premium because cans cost way more than plastic bottles.
Yep.
There has to be some premium story to the product. And what we found was that most people don't understand any of the claims on bottled water, but they can appreciate source. Evian, it's from France.
Right.
Oh, that sounds premium, right? Or, oh, it's from a mountain.
Right.
Yeah, that sounds like it's quality. So I knew we had to have natural quality water, not a lot of these brands like Aquafina or Essentia, a lot of these huge brands, it's just processed tap water.
I mean, and they taste like it.
Yeah. And there's one of my favorite people ever, Martin Rees. He's the water sommelier, and he's on TV shows now, and he's really passionate about water. And that's kind of his thing, is he wants to call out all these brands that are just processed, what he calls water made in a lab, that have no minerals in it, and they're charging a premium for it, right?
Sure.
So we needed a good source, and it just, there was not cans that could do it at the source. So I was realizing that, a couple years were going by. And then eventually I said, you know what if I just start looking outside the US? Maybe in Europe, there's something. And sure enough, I found a co-packer in Austria who had big canning lines, and they owned their own mineral water springs. But they also made energy drinks, so that's why they had the cans.
Okay.
So they said, hey, yeah, we can do canned spring water for you here.
And the shipping costs aren't insane on that?
No.
I mean, because the water's heavy.
It was funny. I think it was the French wine industry. They did a study that showed the carbon footprint of a bottle of Bordeaux coming from France to New York is considerably less than a bottle of Napa wine coming on a 18-wheeler all the way across the country to New York.
Just because of the scale of the boat.
The scale of the boat and all that. And when you're shipping a container across the ocean, it's about the same cost to ship a container from Austria to New York as it is to 18-wheeler, the same thing from across the country.
Great.
So we're like, oh yeah, we just need to get it into the US.
Yeah.
And you can use different ports too, right? It was like, hey, we can ship here, we can go all the way around to LA.
Yep.
To the other side. So the cost wasn't prohibitive. And cans were a little bit cheaper over in Europe than they were here. At that time, there was kind of a can shortage because there was so much canned stuff coming out. You couldn't get cans. So it checked all these boxes too, kind of serendipitously. So we said, okay, let's just produce it over there until we get to a point where the industry catches up and we can actually produce quality spring water here in the US and we don't have to ship
Okay,
it
so
over.
you figured out your sourcing, your packaging,
Yeah.
your shipping, brand.
Yeah. So then it was like once we figured out, and I was kind of at that point, it was simultaneously the brand was developing a little bit more, but I really was like, I need to figure out how to make it before I can go too
Yeah.
far. So it was right around that time. Had the name for Liquid Death, and what
Was there a moment of inspiration there? Was this, like a whiteboard with 100 names and this stood out? Like how did you get to it?
It was more like I had a notebook where I was just writing tons of things down and trying to make connections. But what I did know was from my marketing experience, especially with the Western Grace experience, no money for marketing.
Yeah.
All the shareability and marketing firepower has to be in the product itself. It can't be just that's an okay product, and then you have to spend to build something interesting around it. It's like, no, the product itself has to be the marketing in a sense. So then it's like, okay, if the name and product itself has to be something that if someone sees it on the shelf, I'm betting they have to pick it up. And if they do pick it up, the first thing they're doing is taking out their phone, taking a picture, putting it on social. Is this real?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Or they want to post a photo of themselves drinking it because look how funny it is. I'm drinking something called Liquid Death. It's almost like you're giving people a tool to be interesting.
Yeah.
Right? So then when I use that as the filter, all the names started dying really quickly. And then it was names like, okay, what would be the craziest thing you could possibly name water? Like starting with that, it's just like an exercise. And I think probably Liquid Death came out of that.
Do you remember other names that were on the list that were long in consideration?
Well, some of the early names and brand direction, it was more that I was trying to imitate the craft beer world because craft beer was a big thing and there was really interesting things happening in packaging and that. So it was a little more subtle. Like there was a name, I think I've mentioned it before, that it was on there. I think it was like Southern Thunder.
Okay.
And it was just like, it kind of sounds like it could be a craft beer thing, but it's not provocative. It was more like, let's make this feel like beer.
Yeah.
But it's like, no, that's not enough.
Yeah.
It needs to be, okay, it looks like beer, but then also the name is like, holy shit.
Right.
So.
Well, and you've got this metal and punk background.
Yeah, right.
So,
yeah. And then, we originally had this idea. It was like on the can before it was a skull. It was like one of those old, like 1800s illustrations of like a ship that was about to be swallowed by this wave of the ocean. So it's kind of like more of a literal water as dangerous kind of thing.
Yeah.
But then, we kind of looked at it. We're like, with the ship and Liquid Death, it kind of feels like pirate water.
Yeah.
I don't know if we want to make pirate water, right? So then I got connected to this guy, Will Carsola, who created this Adult Swim TV show that ran for many seasons called Mr. Pickles.
Oh my God. Mr. Pickles is definitely not safe for work.
No.
And like weirdly has Brooke Shields in a massive role and is one of the funniest YouTube deep dives you will ever.
That's so amazing.
Mr. Pickles is, it's and transgressive, like crazily transgressive.
Yeah. So,
wow. Yeah.
Yeah. A buddy of mine was like, oh my God, you have to see this show. And we watched it at his house one night. And I was crying, laughing. I'm like, this is insane. I didn't even know that this kind of like animation TV show even existed. And clearly these guys are metalheads, who made this. So then literally I decided I'm going to look up the guy who made it, found him on Instagram, direct message him, hey, I have this water company called Liquid Death that I'm trying to get off the ground. I haven't actually made anything yet, but would you want to be involved in some way? I'm a huge fan. Sure enough, he got back.
Wow.
And said, yeah, this is cool. Like, let's talk. So then he drew the first skull that's our now logo as just like, hey, I drew this funny skull. I thought it could be cool. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. And I'm like, hey, if I made this gold and put it on the can, this is way cooler than the ship.
Wow.
And then that's when we kind of had like the final, this is the brand.
That's amazing. I mean, and incredible that like an Instagram DM to a creator, like he's like, yeah, and I mean, you end up with this iconic logo because, I mean, what's fascinating is you took the step too, which a lot of people won't do. They don't shoot the shot.
Yeah, right.
That's epic. That's amazing.
And the funny story was he was like, I saw your DM. He's like, I was in a party van with a bunch of friends on our way to medieval times. And like I saw the DM and I showed everybody, hey, look at this thing I got. Like, do you think this brand is cool? And everyone's like, Liquid Death, that sounds pretty cool.
Yeah.
She's like, okay, I'll respond. So yeah, we started just working together more. So now he's our full-time creative director at Liquid Death.
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've got your shipping, your packing, your packaging all figured out. You've got your brand figured out. Probably need some money.
Yeah. So then once it was like, okay, I've got pricing for filling cans and shipping and all of that. I have this huge social media following because we made a Facebook page for Liquid Death long before we ever had real product. And we made a $1,500 funny video that got a couple million views. The page had like 80,000 followers. So kind of had this audience that wasn't sure if this was real or not. Like they just thought it was a funny page to follow. Then I had the economics figured out, producing it, have a source, all of that. Now it was like, okay, looks like I need to raise at least 150 grand.
Okay. Which in venture is not a lot of money, but in the real world is
a lot. Yeah. Especially
stretch.
when I have no money in my bank account still. So then I went out trying to raise just from former bosses I had that were, executive creative directors, probably pulling in 350 plus grand a year. Like they could write a check for $5,000 on as a gamble. And I always had good relationships with people I work with. Like I didn't burn too many bridges. So reached out to those people who really understood marketing and brand. And when I showed them the idea, like, oh, this is genius. Like you got to do this. So I kind of just cobbled together $5,000, 10 grand. And then basically just, put together like 150. And at that point, I knew, okay, I need a co-founder who is the spreadsheet money guy. I'm the creative guy. Yep. So then a good buddy I went to high school with named JR Riggins, he was sort of kind of like a career entrepreneur. Like he always had a little hustle kind of going on. Like he started his own little clothing brand for a bit. He did his own like printing on canvas thing. So he always was like self-sustainable, like just enough money where he could kind of support himself, but he did everything, like from the design to like the finance to the supply chain stuff. And at that time he was doing his own custom furniture company.
Okay.
So, he was building stuff on his own and enough people wanted it that he just started, hey, I can design it, source the builds to these other outside companies and then do projects for startups. Hey, we want a conference room table and he can design it, do it. I think Whole Foods contracted him to do some stuff in the stores. So we kind of had that going and I reached out, said, hey, I got this traction, and he was into it. And we just kind of started, putting together, okay, now we've got the 150. How do we want to allocate that? How do we think about what we need to spend and how long it's going to last? And just really doing all that work he was helping me on. And then we still didn't have real product so he probably started working with me in June of like 2018.
Okay.
We didn't actually get the first product produced until October. So it was like that summer we were raising the money.
Yeah. But you still have a I mean, it's not like you can walk into CVS and be like, "Hey, I got a case of Liquid Death."
We had a liquid. We were direct to consumer strategy.
So is that the reason? Because distribution in the category is so hard, or
I didn't know enough about it. Like all I knew was, hey, there's a lot of people selling a lot of stuff on the internet, and we can win the internet. And there was tons of startups like at that time, so it was always just kind of, hey, we can just sell this via a website, and then we found out that, hey, with Amazon, they do a type of, back of the house fulfillment where you can have a website, you ship it to Amazon's warehouses, they're fulfilling it, they're charging you a fee for everything they ship out, but it looks like it's just coming from your website.
Yeah.
So we basically built that as a business plan of how we were going to go to market.
Gotcha. And was this when you guys launched your first video? Your first, I guess we'll call it an ad, but it's kind of a piece of content?
We launched that a year before we
It
ever
was a
actually
year
sold
before
it.
you had before the product was in
It
market.
was in market, yeah. So that's what we made it seem like a real product, and we kind of got some people signed up for pre-orders, but
Huh.
there's not a ton of people that want to pre-order a case of water.
And that
right?
video, which we'll link to in the show
Yeah.
notes, reminds me in many ways of the Dollar Shave Club launch video.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. I mean, it's the same kind of like you're clearly not spending a ton of money, but like super, I mean, funny on the one hand, also a little risky on another. Right. Like, why put that out before you have a product? Like that feels like an investment of time and creativity and at least a little bit of money before there's even something to sell.
Because at the time, I knew that nobody was writing me a check for the idea of Liquid Death. Hey, I want to put water in a can,
Yeah.
put a skull on it,
Yeah.
and make it look like beer. That's never going to work. Retail buyers will never take it.
Yeah.
People are going to be confused. So I kind of knew I needed to prove out the concept first. And social media is like the ultimate focus group.
Yeah.
You know, like clinical focus groups, I don't think really work. Like you can learn a little bit from them, but it's Liquid Death would have died in every.
No, I mean, I
focus
think
group.
our episode title is Death by Focus Group.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
Liquid Death by Focus Group. Yeah.
But when you make something seem real and see how people actually react to it in normal circumstances,
Yeah.
you know, hey, let's put it out. The $1,500 was not a lot of money at the time, you know, and I was making decent money. So, you know, I can bet a little bit on this. And then, yeah, once I had millions of views, once we had tons of followers, all these comments, we actually had 7-Eleven franchisees DMing us, hey, how do we get this in our
Really?
stores? We had a distributor from New York say,
Wow.
hey, can we talk to a salesperson?
Demand with no supply.
They with no supply.
Yeah.
So then I used all of that to raise the round. Now people believed, oh, this might really be a thing.
Hell
It's
of a
not.
proof point. I mean,
Yeah.
if 7-Eleven's reaching out to you and saying, how do we get your product? That's a great place
Right.
to be.
Right.
Okay, so we've kind of covered 0 to 1. If my memory serves, you guys did about 10 million in 2019, and you're at like 120 million a couple of years later.
Well, 2019 was year one. We
Okay.
did like just under 3 million.
Okay, so just under 3 million.
Yeah,
My
year
bad
one,
on
yeah.
my memory. But your scale story of the next few years is epic. I mean, you're into 9 figures within a few years.
Yeah.
What happens in that time frame? You're obviously not just direct to consumer anymore. There's a Whole Foods deal in there.
Yeah.
Like what happens that you can achieve such extraordinary scale in such a short period of time?
Well, one I think was the marketing firepower that we had, which was always an entertainment first approach to marketing, which was not a new concept. Like you said, not reinventing the wheel. Monster, Red Bull successfully did it, right?
Absolutely.
Now, their specific entertainment is action sports. And I believe there's more entertainment in the world than just action sports.
Sure.
But they found a way to market the brand that doesn't feel like marketing. It's people would pay to watch
Yeah,
skateboarders, so
content.
it's content. It's
Yeah.
real content. And the brand is incorporated into that content, but you don't watch something thinking that feels like a Red Bull commercial. No, that's just a guy jumping out of a thing in outer space, but
Yeah.
he's got a Red Bull helmet on.
Yeah.
So when we took the entertainment first approach and we said, hey, I want comedy to be our vertical, because that's what we like. I know how to be funny. Like that comedy drives the internet. You know, it makes a ton of sense. So we really think about it not as risky. We just look at it as, hey, we're writing Saturday Night Live skits.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we've always used the guardrails. Like mainstream broadcast television show, mass consumption across America. It's been around 40 years
Yeah.
for a reason. It's like, if Saturday Night Live would do it, we could probably get away with doing
Yeah.
it, right? So it's not about being edgy. It's about, hey, if you want to legitimately entertain people, look where the bar is for comedy entertainment.
Yeah.
What are the jokes being told in stand-up, the number one stand-up special on Netflix? What's the number one comedy movie? What's happening there? What's the number one comedy influencer that's got a bajillion followers? What are they doing? That's where you realize the bar is, just for you to even be considered
Yeah.
entertainment
Yeah.
in comedy. So for us, you know, compared to crappy commercials that no one wants to watch, like, oh yeah, this is extreme. But compared to real entertainment that people want to pay to watch, it's tame.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. And so, okay, so you've got that approach. You're churning out content. You're entertaining audiences. People are sharing it with each other, and that's going to lead to a lot of demand growth.
Right.
But you still have to get the product into customers' hands.
Right.
And and direct to consumer only gets you so far.
Right.
So what was the inflection point or the inflection points where you're all of a sudden, I mean, you must have been doing, 100+% growth month over month for periods here. Like what was driving that?
It was, I mean, again, it was a lot of the awareness. It was, so we had product, people could easily go to a website to order it. So when we would put out a piece of content and then news media would pick it up.
Yeah.
Like I remember when we put out our second big piece of content, the first one was the waterboarding video,
Yep.
right? That happened a year before we had product.
Yep.
Then when we officially launched, we sort of recut that as like a relaunch video.
Okay.
Because so many people still hadn't seen it. And now we had real product. Then the next sort of viral thing we made an animated commercial with Will
Mhm.
from Mr. Pickles. And I think that was May of 2019.
Okay.
And that was almost like our relaunch because we sold out of all the product we had in the first month. And we thought it would last like 3 months.
Yeah.
So we actually were sold out, had no product for almost 2 full months because it took so long to get more from Austria. So we kind of went dark almost for a little bit.
Mm.
And then once we had product back in warehouse, we did like a relaunch in May with this animated video that was all about like murdering thirst.
And you're still direct to consumer at this point.
Still direct to consumer.
Okay.
And then,
And
then
have
that's
you-
when we got picked up by
Okay. And I mean, you got to pay for the water. You got to pay to get
Yeah.
it shipped over. So if you're raising more money in
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
Okay. And so what happens that you all of a sudden start showing up on shelves? I mean, I'll never forget, we were in COVID, driving with my family back from Idaho, and we stopped at like a nondescript, like unbranded, basically gas station, like probably in the Oregon border or something. And like, there's Liquid Death sitting in the cooler. And I'm like,
Right.
this is insane that I'm finding this here. So how does your retail distribution start to pick up so that you can really scale the company?
So the first big retailer that took us on was Whole Foods.
Okay.
A lot of the other retailers in year one, even though we were killing it on, direct to consumer, Amazon, retailers like, I think maybe it was like a Target broker was like, yeah, it's not really the right fit for mom.
Yeah.
So a lot of retailers were too afraid of the brand early.
Okay.
But Whole Foods, they loved our death to plastic
Uh-huh.
sort of mission that we had on the cans, that we donate a portion of the profits to help kill plastic pollution. They liked that story. And they knew from a brand perspective, there was nothing else in their stores like this.
Right.
And Whole Foods, they care about sustainability. It's a whole plastic water section
Right.
in the store.
Yeah.
Um,
And did Whole Foods pick you up nationally? Because they're usually they'll pick up someone really locally or most regionally. Did they?
and that was, they took us full national out of the gate.
So what? How did that happen?
Because I think we already, we could show them, hey, we're going to do 3 million year one, just direct to consumer.
Mhm.
And we were at that time, because it was so expensive to ship water, we had to sell cases for $19.99, a 12
Okay.
pack of water.
Wow. Yeah.
Whole Foods could now sell cases for $14.99.
Hmm.
So then what they, I'm sure, knew, and which was the reason we were so successful at Whole Foods out of the gate, when Whole Foods finally launched us nationally in March of 2020, literally the day after the lockdown started was when we were supposed to load into Whole Foods.
Wow.
Which was a whole another thing. But we could then tell all the people who are buying Liquid Death from our website for $20 a case, oh, you can go to Whole Foods right now and get it for 15.
Yeah.
That's
So-
a
so
compelling
you're able to
reason.
drive foot traffic.
drive
for
foot
them.
traffic
Yeah.
to them, right?
Even in a pandemic.
Even in a pandemic,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, Whole Foods was the first sort of hand raiser, and in the year one, outside of direct to consumer, where we had a focus was what we call on premise, so bars, nightclubs, that kind of thing.
Oh, interesting.
Because you can sell in one by one, they get the brand, we look
Mhm.
like beer. It's a way for we could show them, hey, most people you give a free water to.
Yeah.
Now you can sell them a water
Yeah.
for $3 or $4 that they're actually stoked on because, it's a tall boy can. This
Well, they're
is funny.
stoked on, and they're going to take the selfie, which markets the product, but also markets the bar.
Bar,
I mean,
right? Yeah. So we really were finding like, hey, we were starting to get Liquid Death in like the cool bars in Philadelphia and LA, and bars that were like, hey, I've tried selling bottled water, it doesn't work, or like, hey, I'm moving 3 cases a week of this stuff.
Yeah.
People love it. So that shaped our distribution strategy. So like in summer of 2019, we had direct to consumer starting to work in bars. We were like, well, if you want to be in bars, you kind of have to be on the beer trucks.
Mhm.
They're the ones distributing to the bars.
Mhm.
a lot of these non-alc distributors that would distribute like new kombucha brands and stuff like that, like they're not going to bars, but the beer guys are. And because of the alcohol laws in the US, big alcohol companies are only allowed to own 20% of their distribution network. So Anheuser-Busch, for example, they've got 400 plus distributors across the United States. Anheuser-Busch corporate can only own 20% of those. The rest are all independently owned by, a lot of, wealthy families, and they can decide which products they distribute in their region.
Right.
So yes, they distribute all the Budweiser, Bud Light, all of that, but they can pick craft beer brands they want to distribute, non-alc brands, what have you. So we were able to then go one by one to these distributors and try to convince them to take on Liquid Death because, hey, you can sell this into all the bars that you go to.
Well, and I love the callback because now you're taking advantage of the regulated industry that was holding you back earlier. Now you're like, well, I'm gonna make this work for me.
Yeah.
Bring us up to today because you're no longer just still water in a can, right? You've got multiple product lines. How have you decided where to expand and how's that expansion going for you all?
So we've always stayed true to the mission, which is we want to make healthy beverages just as fun and funny as unhealthy beverages like alcohol or even like candy and junk food. So health is always where we start.
Yeah.
So yes, it started with spring water in a can, one of the healthiest things you could drink, make that really fun. And then the next thing was, okay, if we were going to make something else, like what else is a healthy beverage category where, again, sea of sameness, not a lot of interesting brands. So then we looked at flavored sparkling water.
Yep.
So it was like LaCroix, Bubbly, Waterloo. It's just a sea of like pastel cases and it's all value, right? It's like $4.99 for this, 12 pack of cans. It's like, imagine if the bottled water aisle was only the cheap 24 packs and there was no Fiji and there was no Evian or these other premium brands. So we said, hey, this is healthy category. People perceive it as healthy. It's popular. It's growing really quickly. Sea of sameness. We can go in there and be one of the first sort of premium brands in the space and completely differentiated from a brand standpoint. And also we said, again, from the liquid standpoint, we don't want to just repackage LaCroix. How can we do something a little different? And we said, well, the problem with LaCroix is it's almost no flavor. And there was actually memes on the internet that was like, LaCroix tastes like someone whispered a flavor name in the other room.
Right. Yeah.
So we said, hey, we know that so many of our consumers and just people in general are not hardcore calorie counters.
Right.
I had worked on this brand in my previous ad world called Noosa yogurt.
Sure.
Full fat sugar yogurt. They said, this is never going to work. Yogurt is a diet thing. Women will never, ever buy it. And it was hugely successful because people, they do things in moderation. They're not, they're not militant. So we said, hey, if we just put 4 grams of sugar in a big can from agave, so something that feels like a little bit more of a premium ingredient, the flavor difference is night and day. Just a little bit of sugar goes a long way. And now it just feels way tastier if you're comparing it side by side.
It's a lot better than pamplemousse.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So, I think we put together some, like a good formulation, I think that tasted good and we had a cool brand. And again, it was totally better for you, like low sugar, low calorie. And we launched that product and that was 2022.
Yep.
Within 3 months, we were like the number 2 flavored sparkling brand on Amazon.
Wow.
And then by the end of last year, so that was like not even maybe a year and a half of of that product being on the market, we were the number 1 flavored sparkling brand in total dollars in the entire convenience store channel.
Amazing.
Because like that convenience store customers typically male, it's like a construction worker, goes to a 7-Eleven. All the like LaCroix brands were not working. They were just getting discontinued. It just didn't resonate. And probably wasn't quite enough flavor for like more like the
also now you're not just winning on brand because you're winning on product.
Right.
Yeah, it's both.
It's both. It's both now. Yeah. And I think it's easier when you start with something simple and add function versus like, there's brands like Monster right now is trying to directly come after Liquid Death with their own canned water, Tor water, the thing that they originally sold, that would never sell
15 years ago. They only,
And, we just looked in a recent, in a convenience store, a big chain in the South, and like even at more money, Liquid Death is outselling it like 4-1.
Wow.
So it just, but it's like people have known them for so long as energy, and then all of a sudden you take away the function and charge almost the same price.
Yeah.
You have to really be betting on that people want to be seen with a Monster logo. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure that is the case.
Do you think
now,
you can
right?
go in the other direction? Are we going to have a Liquid Death energy drink that's going to compete with Monster?
Yeah, we get asked that a lot. And I think it's more, again, we would only do it if it's truly better for you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if Liquid Death makes an energy drink with 200 milligrams of caffeine and a kid drinks 3 of them and has a heart attack,
Right. No good.
Liquid Death isn't funny.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think there's enough cool energy drinks out there. Like, do you need another cool energy drink?
Right.
So I think that's why we then focus on, okay, well, flavored, low calorie flavored sparkling water, one there. What's another healthy category that most Americans perceive as healthy?
Mm-hmm.
We said iced tea.
Yep.
And then again, not many interesting brands in iced tea
Nope.
at all. Like Arizona, but they've been around for like 30 years
Yeah.
or whatever. And tons of sugar.
Yep.
Like just crazy amounts of sugar. So we said, hey, what if we make more of like a low sugar, low calorie tea that looks really cool? So then we launched iced tea early last year. And that was like the first time, even though our flavored sparkling is really more like a healthy soda,
Mm-hmm.
people still called it water.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you're still a water company.
Yeah.
Tea was the first time where it was really, hey, this is not water, totally different thing. And now tea's been one of our most successful things that we've done. And because again, I think as we continue, charging a premium for just water, there's like a ceiling for the people who kind of can rationalize that.
Yeah.
Then it's like flavored sparkling. It's still a value-driven category. So like we are premium, but then tea, it's like, oh, there's stuff in it. Like now people can like rationalize like a premium a little
Yeah.
bit easier. But again, launch tea goes on Amazon within a few months. We're the #1 tea on Amazon. Now retailers, we have way more retailers under our belt. They like us now. Like
Right.
we're making them a lot of money.
Yeah.
They get that like, oh, this brand is not serious. Like we're funny.
Yeah.
Like Liquid Death is a sarcastic name. Like we don't actually think we're badass. It's no, that like we're making fun of marketing. And I think that's the thing that most Liquid Death fans connect to is look at the data. It's like 98% of people hate marketing.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter who you are.
Yeah.
And you can look at Liquid Death, and when you can get that that's what we're doing is making fun of marketing, you don't have to be into skulls to like Liquid Death. You're like, I like what they're doing.
No, and murder your thirst is one
Yeah.
of the great taglines of recent marketing history. I mean, it's an incredible because it's directly on brand, but there's a wink to it. It's funny.
Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
So what's next? What should we expect to see?
Well, I think now, and that's part of the discipline of a brand growing so fast, you have to start at a certain point saying no to things, right?
Yeah.
Like you got to be able to be focused. And I think, even right now between, premium source water, which is our mountain water product, which we have as a still and sparkling version, comes from a mountain. We have that huge category. We've got flavored sparkling, huge category. And then now we have iced tea, huge category. I mean, we should be able to become a pretty massive business between those 3 categories before we have to really start thinking about investing in yet another category,
Yeah.
right? So we're really focused. Like this year, we rolled out new flavors of sparkling.
Mhm.
So, we started with just 3 flavors. The second year, we only added 1 additional. That proved out really well. So now we added 3. So now we've got like 7 or so flavors of sparkling. Tea, we started with 3 flavors.
Mhm.
This year we added 2 more. So now we've got about 5 basically flavors of tea. So yeah, we're really just focused on, how do we really start just refining and winning and taking even more share within these categories that we've proven are going to work for us.
Yeah.
But we're still early stage
Yeah.
in a lot of these.
With all the things that you've done right and that have gone right in the last 5+ years, is there something that's gone wrong? Is there something where you look back and go, God, I wish we had taken a left turn instead of a right turn, or we'd done this differently? Was there one big miss in there for you guys?
I think we were really good with risk mitigation. Like we never made huge bets. Even in marketing, we still use the phrase like small bets. Like we can spend 10 grand on this thing, and if it doesn't work, like it's not going to break the bank. Versus some companies like, oh, you present us the marketing campaign, and then some guys in a room decide that's the one that's going to work, and we're going to put $100 million in that campaign. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? So I think we've always been able to like risk mitigate pretty well. And we never had too many big misses, I don't think. I mean, I guess one thing I would say, I really wanted to do tea as our first new innovation before flavored sparkling water. Yeah. And I think I got talked out of it by our former head of sales. It was like, no, I don't know. It's not proven. We're water. Like, hey, LaCroix and everything is so big right now. Like we could just so easily make this. But just my gut told me that like tea is such a great category, and we could just really quickly go from water to not water.
Yeah.
Now it's like we went from water to enhanced water to tea.
Right.
So we're still, having people think of Liquid Death as, hey, we're not a water company anymore. Like I think right now, if you look at our scan sales for the last year, just plain still water is like maybe 30% of our total sales now.
Wow. That's incredible revenue diversification in like no time.
Yeah. So we're really not a water company anymore.
Yeah.
We're a beverage company that also makes water. And I think as the company grows, still water, again, huge category. I think just still water alone is like 15 billion in the US. A lot of people drink still water. Also super saturated too.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I think if I could have changed something different, I maybe would have had tea be our first non-water innovation out of the gate, knowing how successful. But yeah,
that's a flesh wound, if even that. Yeah. What's the best part of being CEO of Liquid Death, and what's the worst part?
The process of it all. Like I love building stuff. Like even when I was a creative in agencies, I didn't love sitting in a room for 8 hours, banging my head against the wall, trying to think of a creative idea.
Yeah.
I had the most fun once we had the idea, bringing it to life.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, we get to go find the production company and the director, and they get to go location scout, and we get to shoot the thing and then edit the thing and then figure out the media plan and watch what happens. That was where I had the most fun. So I think CEO is kind of like that. It's like, hey, I get to constantly be doing different things. Like, hey, I get to be learning about supply chain and different co-packing and crazy machinery. Like that's really cool. And then I also get to be a part of the marketing and how do we just make these huge viral moments? And then also just thinking about how do you build the company and culture? How do we have creativity sort of permeate every aspect of the organization? Like we have a thing, there's this great movie that I think is underappreciated that we make almost all new Liquid Death employees watch called Stay Tuned.
I don't know.
Yeah. It was like an 80s movie with John Ritter.
Okay.
That was like way too high budget for what it was.
Three's Company, John Ritter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's basically the concept of this guy buys a satellite dish from like the devil and it sucks him in. And then he's in this weird, like demonic version of normal TV world. And he has to survive for a certain period of time before they can let him out.
Amazing.
But it's like a bunch of just really spoofy, funny marketing where it's like, instead of Wayne's World, it's like Dwayne's Underworld. And it's like these weird commercials for like, it was like, now the silencer of the lambs. And they're selling like the face mask. And like, I did that because I think it helps people get in the mindset that Liquid Death is a joke. Like what we're doing is making fun of marketing. And it's not about that, oh, we're dark or we're demonic. It's that making fun of marketing in that tone of voice is funny.
Yeah.
Because it's so polar opposite. You never think of chuckle cheese, big marketing in terms of like weird darkness. Like together they make this interesting thing that's really funny.
Yeah.
And I think that movie does a good job of showing, how you can have a mainstream thing that brings these sort of two sensibilities together. So like that kind of stuff and thinking about how you build culture and that I think is really fun.
Awesome. Worst part of being CEO?
I feel like I hate anything that has to do with legal.
Okay.
Just like, lawyers, like regulation. Like, I mean, one of the craziest things that I learned about bottled water, thinking, no regulation. So bottled water is so highly regulated on a state basis. So like a state like New York, if you bottle water outside the state of New York and you want to sell bottled water in New York, you have to go through an 8-month process, submit geological reports of where your facility is, like all kinds of crazy stuff,
Yeah.
pay all this money. It could take a year.
Yeah.
However, same source, if I put 1 teaspoon of caffeine in there and it's not bottled water, no regulations, go right in.
Yeah.
So it has to be a racket of some kind.
Well, it's
right?
maddening because good regulation is critical. We
Right.
have to have it. But then you get this kind of bad regulation. Like, you really, if I drop a teaspoon of sugar in, like, I no longer have to go through 8 months of hell.
Yeah, because
like,
you're not calling it
and
bottled
spend a
water
fortune.
anymore.
Like,
right.
this is insane. Yeah, I get that.
And there's, and California does a similar type. So
Yeah.
it was like being in the weeds of all that stuff is not fun to me.
Yeah.
But we have really smart people who do that stuff.
Okay.
Well, so.
2 pieces of advice. One, for the entrepreneur, for the individual who's tried and failed and is working that day job and is just miserable, trying to find their way, and is in that low point that you found yourself in.
It's only temporary. Everything's only temporary. Everything feels like it's the end. But I mean, there's people who super successful people that didn't find their stride till they're in their 40s. Like, I think Rodney Dangerfield, like, no one knew who he was till he was like,
He got no respect.
Yeah, almost like he was 50, and he had this huge career after that. So I think that's always one thing, like, keep in context that, like, things just take time.
Yeah.
And then, like, what I found, and it seems like it's almost cliche advice at this point, but it seems to be so powerful, is just do what you love doing, and most likely the money will come.
Yeah.
Like, if you truly care about something and love it more than someone else, you're going to spend more time doing it. You'll understand it better. You won't care about working the hours because it's fun. And it just naturally probably going to give you an edge of success over someone else. And it's going to attract other people in a way that monetizes it, versus like people who are trying to figure out what's the next big thing. How do I go tap into this? It's like, just find what you love and do better than most other people, and probably find a way to monetize it.
Yeah.
That's it.
And then for the entrepreneur who's got a product, and it's a really good product, there's no question. It's a superior product. It's differentiated. But they haven't found the market. It just hasn't broken through yet. I realize there's a lot of specifics in there, but what do you say to them about how to take that next step, how to find that product market fit and begin that scaling journey?
It's not as hard as you think, right? You can spend a tiny bit of money to test something. And I think social media is a great testing ground for stuff, because I mean, you can just literally, I mean, especially now with like AI tools, you could be like, hey, create this image for no money, run a Facebook ad against it for even like $100.
Yeah.
And then do another one that's totally different, run it for $100. Now, you're not going to get a ton of volume, but you might see, hey, this one had 10 likes and this one had 1. So that's 10x.
Yep.
So this one might actually be better than this one.
Yeah.
Right? So I think, find low cost ways to test stuff. Because I think there's so many people that have the misconception that someone's just going to give you money to go figure out your idea.
Yeah.
That's very rare.
Not going to happen.
It's like, no, you need to prove out there's something really there. Whether that means, hey, I want to create this snack brand. Well, why don't you go make your own food truck and go out? Like, what does that cost? And like, do something so then you go to an investor, someone like, why should they gamble on you? Like, so I think that's the other part, is like, you gotta get something going and find some cheap way to get some traction before anyone's going to even take the time to like, give you a check or anything.
Amazing. Is there anything we didn't talk about that you wish we'd talked about here?
In the early days of when Liquid Death was still just like the side project and I knew I wanted to do it, Masters of Scale was the podcast that I listened to learn how to be an entrepreneur.
Was there an episode that specifically helped you on the journey?
Pops out. Not really. It was when, it was Reed, talking with these different entrepreneurs and the growth of scale. And it was more like, I was learning more, I think, from Reed's point of view.
Yeah.
Like, I had used his quote in the early days for a long time, that true innovation has to be almost laughable at first. It was like such a perfect thing to understand Liquid Death. Is like, everyone thought it was so ridiculous. Like, oh, no one's ever going to buy water in a can. But then you sort of realize like, oh yeah, people said the same thing about Uber. Who's going to drive a stranger in their car who's puking in the back seat? Silicon Valley, so out of touch, So yeah, I think it's you kind of know you're onto something when people sort of have a really emotional, even if negative, reaction to it at first. Like
Yeah.
you know that you're probably in good territory. The stuff when you come up with something and people you talk to say, "Oh yeah, that's genius," it probably means there's a lot of other people already doing something similar. Like it
Yep.
makes too much sense.
Yep.
You know.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we were able to play a small part in your scaling
Yeah.
journey. We're grateful to have you here. Thanks for spending the time with us.
Thank you.